So let's get started. Before we get started on Alteryx, let's take a look at our data that we have given to you through the video. It is the Netflix data, should be an Excel spreadsheet. Now that we have it open, let's take a look at our data. First, we see the show ID, the type, and the title, director, and cast for our media content. They're separated by dashes, and it seems like the title, director, and cast are surrounded by quotation marks. So how can we separate these data items? So there's one data item for each column, and we have clean data set that we can look to further implement any kind of data exploration or data prediction or anything that we can use. We need to first clean our data. So through Alteryx, we'll see how we can clean our data super quick and easy. So let's get started. Let's exit out of this Excel spreadsheet. And what we'll do is when you have your folder open and your Alteryx open, you can just drag and drop this Netflix data Excel spreadsheet onto the canvas, and automatically Alteryx will assign an input data tool, and we'll select the first sheet, sheet 1, to import. So press OK. And let's take a look at our input data tool. Seems like it has loaded on the data that we want. So let's run it. All right, we have ran it, and now we have our data in Alteryx. Okay. Next, we want to parse out each column so that we have 5 columns where there's show ID in one, type in the other, title, director, and cast. We can use the parse. Under the parse section in our tools, you'll see text to columns tool. So we'll drag and drop this so that the connection is made. And there are several options that I'd like to talk about. First, you can choose which columns to split. We're just going to choose the one because there is only one column in our data. And you have to select the delimiter. Now the delimiter is the separator in your data. And we know that our data is separated by this dash symbol. So we'll actually delete this comma and put in a dash. You can either split to columns or split to rows. And we'll select split to columns because we want our show ID and type and title and director and cast in each column separately. So we'll choose the number of columns as actually 6. Instead of having 5 different columns because we have 5 different items, we'll choose 6 columns because we want to leave anything extra in the last column to check our work. So we'll have 5 plus 1 to leave extra in the last column. For the extra characters in your parsing, you can either drop it or leave it or create an error, depending on what you want. We'll keep it as leave extra in last column. For the output root name, we won't put anything because if you were to have a column that has the same item in there and you have a root name, for instance, this column has ID numbers, 2 ID numbers, and you want to separate it, then you would put the output root name as ID. However, our columns that we're splitting have different items in there, so putting a root name would not be necessary for this instance. We have some advanced options that we can take a look at. One, we can ignore the delimiters and quotes, meaning we'll ignore the dashes, the dashes inside the quotes. This will be actually handy in our case because we know that the title, director, and cast is surrounded by quotes, and sometimes titles have dashes, so does names. So ignoring the dash and quotes will help us to not split the names or the titles because they have dashes. Okay. You can also do that in single quotes, parentheses, brackets, but we don't have any of those. We'll just skip those. And we might skip an empty column. Empty column meaning there's nothing inside the column, so just skip it if you don't have any data populating it. So after we have these options specified, let's go ahead and run it. All right. Alteryx has ran it and it has parsed out the data in a very easy to look at type of view in our results window. One thing that we should know is that the red marks gives us something of a warning when we're looking at our data. Let's take a look at what the warning is. It says 100% it's not okay. Let's see the reason why. If you take a look at the cell, it'll say the cell has leading spaces or has leading or trailing spaces. So this is the reason why it's marked with red. We have to clean our data so it doesn't have any of these leading spaces or the trailing spaces. So how can we do that? Well, we'll use what is called a data cleansing tool. A data cleansing tool, let's bring it in. From the preparations section, it's the second one. Let's drag and drop it next to our text to columns tool. The data cleansing tool is very handy. The reason is because it'll just clean your data with the given options, and you can also specify which columns you want to cleanse. So let's look at our data first and address which columns we need to clean. We need to clean the second and the third column that we parsed out. We also have to get rid of this null column. It seems like it's 100% null. So let's get rid of this null column because it does not have any data that we want to take a look at. So in our data cleansing tool, after it loads, we'll remove the null column, which is the sixth column of the parsing tool. And we'll select the fields 2, 3, and 6. So get rid of any other options there. And we'll also replace the nulls. So when I talked about the null column, it means that there is no data in there or there is missing data. So it does not help with any of the data exploration or any thing that could be useful to having our data. So we want to replace it with blanks. If it's a string field meaning any characters, basically characters or numbers, letters that we don't add up. Or we can replace with 0 if it's a numeric field. So you can add numeric fields together. If it's like dollars or anything like that, we can add those up. So having these replace nulls will help us with our data exploration later on. So let's have these options still selected. We already have the leading and trailing white space, removing those already selected. So let's have that selected and keep it. And you can remove any other unwanted characters, such as tabs, line breaks, duplicate white space, etc., depending on what you want. So we'll just keep our first option selected in that section. You can also modify the case. So if you had all caps in your data, you can change it to uppercase, lowercase, or a title case, depending on what you want. We don't need that, so we'll unselect it. Let's run our data now. Now that it's been run, let's compare the input and the output. One is before coming in, we had the red marks and the sixth column. Coming out, we don't have the sixth column anymore, and we definitely do not have the red marks anymore. So there you go. With several of these check marks, we were able to clean our data easily. And if you work in the data field, you probably know data cleansing takes a ton of time. So Alteryx can shrink that time into fractions. Now that we have cleansed our data and we have the items that we want in each column, let's get rid of this first column that we originally brought in. And let's also rename these columns to the actual data content. So instead of 1, we'll put in show ID, type, title, director, and cast. How can we do that? Well, we have a video on select tool, so go ahead and watch it if you do not know how to use the select tool. But basically, the select tool, you can bring it in and you can select on which fields to include in our data or exclude. We're going to exclude the first column, so let's uncheck it. You can also change the type of data. It has the types of string, integer, which are whole numbers, decimal numbers, which are floats and doubles. So you can change it. We have also the date time, spatial object data types ready for you, but we'll just keep it at bstring. And let's rename our columns. So on our configurations window, you'll see under rename column, you can select it and you can rename it. We're going to rename the first column or column 1 as show ID, and we'll also say type, the title, director, and cast, so that we have actually more descriptive name than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's run to see what the select tool would change. Great. Now that you see it, you'll probably see, compared to the input of the data, we have columns not with a specific name. Now we have specific names, and we have gotten rid of our original column. Great. Last but not least, what do we have to do? Well, we have to get rid of the quotation marks, because that's not going to be necessary in our data to look at. What can we do to get rid of the quotation marks within Alteryx? There are different ways that you can get rid of a quotation mark, but the tool that we would use is a formula tool. Now, the formula tool has many functions that you can use, and you can either update a column or add a new column to display the output. But what we'll do is we'll take the title, the director, and the cast columns with the quotation marks, and we'll update it without the quotation marks. So let's select the formula tool, and we'll select the title column. You can also add which columns to update by pressing on this plus button. So title, director, and cast. And within our expression here, we'll use what is called a replace function. So go ahead and type in the replace function, and you should have within Alteryx the options that come up, and I would just go ahead and select the option replace. So now we have 3 parts to our replace function. The first one is what string do you want to change? What is the target of what you want to change, and what do you want to replace that target with? So the string we want to change is the title string or title string field. The target we want to change is the quotation marks. So let's have within single quotes to indicate that it's a string, a double quote to indicate what we want to change. So within the single quote is what we want to change, which is the double quote. And what do you want to replace it with? Well, we want to replace it with nothing. So just have 2 single quotes, and it would replace it with blank because there is nothing within these single quotes. And the data preview gives us what we want, which is the title without the quotation marks. Let's go ahead and expand the director and the cast and do the same thing. I would just copy this replace function we have specified, since we know we want to use this, and we'll paste it so that our string that we want to replace is only changed to that column. So now within the director column, I want to replace it with the director column without the quotation marks. With the cast columns, I want to specify the cast column that will replace without the quotation marks. So it should be title, director with the director output column, cast with cast output column. So let's run our workflow to see what it would look like. Great. Now we have our show ID, type, title, director, and cast column. And what we have is a clean data that we can work with to explore the data on more. Thanks for watching.